Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a close look at a really quite extraordinary diplomatic moment happened at the White House.
Yeah, we've got these excerpts, source material detailing this, well, pretty tense verbal clash.
That's right. It's between a U.S. administration representative and the wife of the Canadian Prime Minister.
And this wasn't your usual polite diplomatic tea, that's for sure. Our sources really lay out this direct, almost personal confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Caroline Leavitt from the White House side and Diana Fox Carney, who's married to Prime Minister Mark Carney.
And Mark Carney, the PM, he's around, part of the scene, but this specific fight, it really zooms in on Levitt and Diana Fox Carney.
Exactly. And you can't really get it without the background.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
You have President Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods hanging heavy in the air.
Heavy's the word. And then there was that suggestion from Trump, the idea that Canada could maybe become the 51st state.
Pretty provocative stuff. So yeah, this wasn't just a casual chat. The tension was, well, you could probably cut it with a knife.
No doubt. Right. So our mission today really is to dig into this. We want to understand what drove this exchange.
Yeah, what was underneath it all?
The national pride that was so clearly bubbling up, and maybe what this whole thing tells us about the relationship between the U.S. and Canada.
Okay, let's dive in then. Picture the setting. We're talking a really lavish White House reception room.
Yeah, chandeliers, mahogany furniture, the works, formal tea service out, all the symbols of, high-level talks.
But right away you feel this clash, the fancy setting versus this rising tension.
And the flags, right. Both Canadian and American flags are there. Kind of symbolic of the whole situation.
It really is. It makes you think this formality, usually it's about projecting respect, right?
Usually. But here it feels like the stage for something much more adversarial.
Like those flags are watching something pretty undiplomatic unfold.
It does make you wonder, was this tension, this display, maybe meant for an audience? Was it calculated?
That's a good question. So the first sort of move in this tense situation comes from Diana Fox Carney.
What does she do?
She offers Caroline Levitt a book on Canadian history. Feels like, an attempt at goodwill, a neighborly thing.
It's a classic diplomatic play, isn't it? Offering a bit of culture, suggesting shared understanding.
But Levitt not having it.
No. The sources say she just sort of brushed it off, implied American history was well enough.
And then she gets personal, calls Diana just the woman behind the Prime Minister.
Oof. That's pretty condescending, suggesting she doesn't have her own standing, her own views.
It really is a sharp opening. But Diana's response is, well, quite composed.
How so?
She mentions her background, her Oxford education, her actual work crafting economic policies.
Ah, so a subtle but clear pushback. A reminder that she's not just the wife.
Exactly. And by extension, it's like she's reminding Levitt about Canada's contributions, too. It's not just about being next door.
It immediately challenges Levitt's whole framing, her assumptions. Levitt seems stuck on this old idea of what a political spouse is.
Right. And Diana just calmly redirects, asserts her own expertise.
Do you think that was just correcting the record? Or was there, a deeper strategy there?
I think it was definitely about reclaiming her own space, her own narrative. And then, right after this, a Canadian journalist steps in.
Okay, what happens?
They press Levitt, ask her about Canada being America's largest trading partner, the basic economics of it.
Which contrasts sharply with Levitt's dismissive tone, obviously.
Totally. And Levitt's response, apparently she kind of faltered.
Really, how?
Gave a vague answer, something like, the U.S. has many trading partners, dodging the specific importance of Canada.
That suggests she was either caught off guard or maybe just unwilling to acknowledge the reality of the relationship.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the U.S. message at the time. Was the diplomacy disconnected from the economics?
It seems a bit disjointed, doesn't it? But Leavitt pivots again, right?
She does, and launches this broad attack on Canadian culture itself.
Oh boy. What does she say?
Calls it cautious, says Canadians are always apologizing, says Canada needs America's bold leadership.
Wow. Those are some pretty big stereotypical swings. Very generalizing.
It definitely moves beyond policy disagreements here. This is about national character, national identity.
And clearly meant to provoke, to diminish. It's that whole American exceptionalism narrative versus, painting Canada as lesser.
The choice of words is interesting, too. Cautious, apologizing. What's the implication there?
It feels like trying to paint Canada as, weak, subservient, lacking spine.
Maybe, but Diana's defense is really quite brilliant.
How does she counter?
She takes that courtesy, that apologizing, and reframes it. Says it's not weakness, It's a strength.
A strength. How?
Rooted in confidence, she says.
Yeah.
And mutual respect. And then, boom, she hits back on the economics. Reminds Levitt Canada is America's largest customer.
Nice. Turning the tables. Taking the supposed flaw and making it a virtue.
Exactly. It's like saying we're mature, we're respectful, and we're a huge economic force. Deal with it.
A very effective way to assert Canada's position without getting down in the mud with the same aggressive tone Levitt's using.
But Levitt doesn't back down. She doubles down, apparently. Starts talking Trump's lines again. Tariffs.
And even brings up the 51st state idea again. In that setting.
Yes. The sheer nerve of it right there in a diplomatic meeting.
That's a real escalation. Pushing way past normal diplomatic talk. It feels like a deliberate tactic, that blunt Trump-era style.
Definitely seems calculated to unsettle, to dominate. But Diana holds her ground.
What did she say to that?
Her response is crystal clear, direct. Canada isn't for sale, nor will it ever be. And she demands respect for Canadian sovereignty.
Wow. That's a line in the sand. No messing around.
It really lands. It's not emotional, not reactive, just this strong, principled statement. You can almost feel the national pride behind it.
It taps right into that deep Canadian sense of identity, of independence.
So then the journalist comes back in, switches focus slightly.
All right.
Brings up Prime Minister Carney's background, governor of the Bank of England, huge experience, questions Canada's economic record based on that.
Trying to give Levitt a chance to acknowledge some Canadian strength, maybe?
Perhaps. But Levitt just dismisses it, says it's just one man's work.
Still minimizing.
Yeah.
Still trying to undercut any Canadian achievement, attributing it just to one person, not the system.
It's a pattern, isn't it? And then she gets really personal again, targets Diana directly.
How so this time?
Questions her actual influence, suggests because she works behind the scenes, she doesn't really have power.
Contrasting it with her own role, presumably, as a visible press secretary.
Exactly. Like, I'm young, I'm visible, I have power, you're behind the scenes, so you don't. It's a classic put-down tactic.
And it ties power purely to visibility, to headlines, which is, well, a narrow view.
Very narrow. And Diana calls it out, offers a completely different take on strength.
What'd she say?
She argues strength isn't always about grabbing the spotlight. It's about choosing to support your family, your country.
Grounded in values.
Yes. Canadian values, she says. Unity, sacrifice, purpose. It directly challenges Levitt's whole definition of influence.
That's a powerful counter. But Levitt pushes back.
Oh, yeah. Suggests Diana's view is just an excuse for obscurity. Praises women who, quote, seize the spotlight.
Levitt seems really locked into this one specific idea of female power. Like, if you're not on TV, you don't count.
Pretty much. She just doesn't seem to get that there are other ways to contribute other kinds of strength, especially ones that don't make news every day.
But Diana broadens the argument, right?
She does, eloquently. Talks about the history of Canadian women, their role in actually building the nation.
Oh.
Through wisdom, patience, commitment, not necessarily headlines, and she says she's proud to be part of that tradition.
That's a great move. Connecting her personal choice to this larger historical narrative of Canadian women.
Reframing the whole thing.
And then the journalist picks up on that, asks about the global impact of Canadian women.
Leading Diana to give examples.
Exactly. She talks about leadership in education, sustainable development, community building. Real, tangible impact. Which directly undermines Levitt's dismissive comments about Canadian women, presumably. Gives concrete proof.
Absolutely. But Levitt isn't done. She comes back with another really nasty jab.
Oh, yeah. Tells
Diana she knows nothing about real negotiations, nothing about the power of the American economy, calls her her husband's shadow.
Wow. That's deeply personal and insulting, trying to completely erase her agency.
It really feels like the harshest attack yet, using that old sexist trope to undermine her credibility.
What do you think was behind that? Just frustration, a last desperate attempt.
Maybe peak frustration. It felt really raw. But Diana, she pauses for a moment, gathers herself, and then comes back strong, defends Canada's role, calls it a significant counterweight in the world.
And herself.
And highlights her own direct involvement in international economic policy, working alongside her husband, yes, but deeply involved herself, making it clear she's nobody's shadow.
That's crucial. Directly refuting Levitt's insult with her own experience, her own agency, and tying it to Canada's global role, too.
Levitt apparently tries to mock her again after this. But Diana has another sharp comeback.
Oh, what's that?
She points out that the U.S. tariffs Levitt is defending actually violate the USMCA agreement.
Ooh, pulling out the legal facts. That's sharp.
Right. using specific knowledge to undercut Levitt's whole position. Kind of an intellectual checkmate moment.
Exposing the contradiction in the U.S. stance Levitt is pushing. Shows composure and deep knowledge.
And then, at this peak moment, the whole atmosphere changes.
Ow.
Prime Minister Carney arrives, enters the room.
The dynamic shifts instantly, I bet.
Totally. His presence alone commands attention. And there's this visual, the Canadian delegation stands up when he enters. Respect. Solidarity.
While the American side stays seated.
That's what the sources say. The contrast is telling.
Carney's arrival brings a whole new level of seriousness. Now, it's not just Levitt versus Diana. It's PM versus White House rep.
He walks over to Diana, puts a hand on her shoulder. A really clear public show of support.
Powerful gesture. Unity.
Then he speaks. Directly to Levitt. His tone is reportedly measured, calm, but very firm.
What does he say?
Condemns her disrespect, flat out. And reaffirms Canadian sovereignty. No ambiguity.
Setting a clear boundary. Defending his wife, defending his nation. That's leadership.
Levitt apparently tries one last time. Repeats that Canada needs America's strength.
Still pushing that line.
Yes. But Carney cuts her off. His voice apparently rises a bit now with real authority.
And
says Canada needs no lessons in being Canadian. And that he is immensely proud of his wife and of his country.
That's the final word, really. Completely rejects Levitt's narrative.
Yeah.
Full assertion of Canadian pride, Canadian resilience.
Levitt is cornered, looks uncomfortable, makes one last sort of weak comment about American interests.
But the moment's passed for her.
Definitely. Carney calmly points out her lack of respect, her lack of understanding, hints there might be consequences.
And Diana adds something too.
Yeah, apparently a little parting shot, something like, the lesson might need time to sink in for Levitt.
Nice. The united front of the Carneys is really something there. Shared conviction. Diana's sharp wit adding the final touch.
So what happens to Levitt?
The sources describe her as looking flushed, uncomfortable. Her aides escort her out of the room.
And the Canadians?
A quiet applause ripples through their delegation. A clear sign they felt they'd, well, won that round.
A symbolic victory, absolutely. Levitt's approach just completely backfired against Diana's poise and Carney's firm stand.
The media reaction afterwards really picks up on this, doesn't it?
It does. The Globe and Mail celebrating Diana's strength, calling her an embodiment of Canadian women.
CBC News focusing on the Carneys' unity.
The New York Times even called Carney's final words a rallying cry for Canada.
And even on the U.S. side. Some conservative outlets tried to defend Levitt, sure, but they still had to acknowledge Carney's principled stand.
So the coverage was pretty widespread and mostly saw it as a moment where Canada really stood tall.
Yeah, it resonated. It wasn't just a minor spat. It tapped into something deeper about Canadian pride and resilience.
So wrapping up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways here?
Well, it seems pretty clear that Canada's strength, shown so well by the Carneys here, comes from, unity.
Unity and maybe a kind of measured patience, but also real resolve when pushed too far.
Absolutely. That united front they showed.
Yeah.
Grounded in their values, their sense of identity. That's crucial when things get tough internationally. It sent a powerful message.
And it shines a light on those bigger themes, doesn't it? Canadian independence.
Mutual respect between nations, how important that is.
And just that bedrock of national pride in Canada. It might be quieter sometimes, not always aggressive, but it's definitely there.
Exactly. This whole encounter really highlights different ways countries carry themselves, doesn't it? Shows that quiet strength, smarts, and sticking to your values can be incredibly effective, maybe even more so than loud rhetoric.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, as we finish up.
Yeah.
Think about these qualities we saw: unity, respect for your own principles, that quiet resilience the Carney showed. How could you apply those in your own life? How could sticking to those maybe strengthen your own community or even how you think about your own country in this complicated world?
Something to chew on. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.